we have a feast of sport to get through this morning. From Olympic swim trials to AFL to golf to motorsport to netball to T20 World Cup to tennis to Socceroos to NBA basketball. But we start with the bread and butter that always comes with a topping of some sort. And the topping this morning is blue and white icing, Brandy, because we were at the ground yesterday, Accor Stadium, Sydney Olympic Park, a record crowd for a regular season meeting of the Bulldogs and the Eels. The atmosphere was fantastic, and somehow, against the odds, the Bulldogs come late to beat the Eels 22-18. And this morning, as the listeners in Canterbury Bankstown that I welcomed off the top of the show, they will look at the Bailey's ladder that we'll get to later on, and they'll see their team sitting in 7th spot. Cameron Ciraldo and the Bulldogs take a bow. Good morning to you, Brandy.
Morning, Matty. Great to have you in here. Vossi down again, but he promised me yesterday he'll be right. Now, we were with him yesterday. Sounded good. Didn't look 100%. So,
battling on the inside.
Have a rest, Andrew. What a great game to be at. And the standalone long weekend game has become a great part of the NRL season, hasn't it? And it's been the Eels and the Dogs doing battle over the last 3 years. Before that, it was the Dogs and the Dragons. But the Eels and the Dogs coming to Accor Stadium yesterday thinking, wow, the Eels played like they were the grand finalists a couple of years ago. They'd found their form. The Dogs had been in good form with big wins coming into that match and a very impressive win in the wet against Newcastle the following week. So I knew we were in for something special yesterday. But the fact that we had over 45,000 people there was great. And that's when Accor Stadium does feel its best. I think you've got to have that many people there for Accor Stadium to be at its atmospheric best. And it was yesterday. Lara Pitt down on the sideline, and Lara kept saying, well, it's a blue and white crowd. And it really was. Like, I thought there'd be more Eels there, and they must have been tucked away somewhere. But
was it 80%? I would have a guess at about 80% Bulldogs.
It seemed like it, and you could tell by the reaction of when something would happen out there. And there was that period, Matty, where the Dogs almost scored. I think they got across the line 4 or 5 times, but every something went wrong in each of them, so that they were denied. But the crowd, the enormous noise the crowd would make when they thought their team had scored a try, but they were pulled back to overcome what they did yesterday. And at one stage, the penalty count, and when you're at the game, you realise that you're getting, you think you're getting stitched up by the referee. It was 9-1 the penalty count at one stage, and through that period, incredible defence, goal line defence by the Dogs. It was just a great game, and they had to wait until the 76th minute for the try to come, but it eventually came. And it made me think back. We interviewed Trent Barrett yesterday, pre-game down on the ground, and we found out Mike Acevo was out, and he said, I'm going to play Dejan Arce in the centres. He's done the job before. But boy, Dejan Arce had a hell of a day yesterday, because in the first half, in the opening 20 minutes of the game, he had Stephen Crichton coming at him, and he just couldn't handle him. And then they got their defence right. Sean Russell and Dejan Arce out on that left edge for Parramatta, but it was the end of the game where Connor Tracy's speed was the difference. They went to him once, and then you're thinking, well, don't put that in the bank. Don't bench that. Go at him again, and they did, and they got the Eels at the death. It was great to be at Accor yesterday.
I want to invite Dragons fans into the discussion, because the game's to bookend the round. A big win by St George Illawarra on Friday night, 56-14 against the Tigers, allowed them to go inside the top 8. Now, we jump forward to the final game of the round. Canterbury over Parramatta 22-18. Until those final few moments, the Dragons were in the top 8. And the reason I've invited the Dragons fans in, because for too long, St George Illawarra and Canterbury have not been talked about as finals footy teams. They've been down the bottom for too long. Huge support bases, both of them. Yet this morning, they'll look at the ladder. The Dragons were in the top 8 for most of the weekend, bumped out ultimately by Canterbury's late finish yesterday. But here are two teams that are hinting the back end of the season is going to be exciting. They're going to enter the last few weeks of August saying, come with us, you big support base, because we want to play finals footy. I put it to you, Brandy. Yesterday, 45,000 at a core stadium, Sydney Olympic Park. What happens if the Bulldogs were playing the Dragons this Sunday? What sort of crowd would that game get?
At a core stadium?
Yeah.
Well, it'd have to get 50 plus.
Something similar. Vossi said it in commentary yesterday. Rugby league is flying. The NRL is flying.
Yep.
And having these teams that have been downtrodden for too long, huge support bases saying, come with us now, you could write your own ticket.
Yeah.
Might be more than 50,000.
Parramatta have a handy support base too.
Yes, they do.
But probably it had been 2 months of footy without Mitch Moses, and they'd suffered some horrific losses through that period. But they were very good against the Sharks last weekend. Matty and I didn't think they were bad yesterday. I thought they played some great footy, the Eels. So the Dogs were playing not the Eels of sitting down the bottom of the comp. They were playing the Eels of a couple of years ago, minus the players that have moved on. But their direct running, their big men were good. Moses was threatening. So was Dylan Brown. So was Clint Gutherson. So they had plenty to defend the Dogs. It wasn't as if the Eels were off their game and the Dogs got the win. It was the Eels on, but the Dogs better. And the Dogs haven't played finals footy since 2016. I don't know how long it is that the Dragons, how far back you have to go before the I've lost track, but we'll find out. But you're right, two big supporter-based clubs in form. And it's good to see. It's good for the game.
Absolutely. And all the ingredients were there yesterday. Two teams off impressive wins. Both teams brought their A game. Big crowd, close finish. The atmosphere was fantastic. But before we go to Cameron Ciraldo talking about this victory, we really need to set the scene, Brandy, and what the Bulldogs endured yesterday. They lost Bailey Hayward, HIA, early on.
Pretty early.
They lost Josh Curran to a really nasty HIA. They lost Jacob Preston to what is feared to be a fractured ankle. They had Kurt Mann sin-binned, for which he's facing a 2-week ban for a crusher tackle. Now, they came into the game without some of their biggest stars. While Mitch Moses and Gutherson had returned for the Eels, no Kickow, no Addo Carr. So to come in a little skinny in terms of your big-name stars and then endure the loss of Hayward, Curran, Preston and Mann, and the penalty count, and the lopsided possession and territory, and the offload count was 12-4 against. You'd go on and on the way that they were crucified statistically. Yet you look at the scoreboard after 80 minutes, and it's 22-18. On a day, a couple of their club legends were given their belatedly 300-game rings, mentioning Terry Lamb, Paul Langmack, the other, to get the 300-game diamond-encrusted gold ring. They look spectacular, and it must be said their team performed spectacularly against the odds.
Yeah, and it's great. Cameron Ciraldo must be loving life at the moment, because last year was a real slog for him. 10 changes, brought in 10 new faces, and why the Dogs... I think there can be some genuine optimism about the Dogs is the fact that their defence is rock solid. They've built their game on defence, and all of a sudden, the same processes that Cameron Ciraldo brought to the club last year are paying off. And it's got to do with the signings, the new signings, the new atmosphere around the place, the culture that he was trying to build has been bought into by these players that he's delivered to the club. Everyone had question marks. Well, not really question marks about the players, but where were they going to play? Who was going to be? And I think, midway through the year now, Cameron Ciraldo's idea of what his side is to look like for the rest of the season is starting to fall into place. We've got some players that aren't part of the team. Blake Taff, like Connor Tracy, has locked in that number 1 jersey. Toby Sexton, in my eyes, has locked down that number 7 jersey. Just some sharpness, just a little bit of speed, a little bit of difference to what Drew Hutchison offered, who is a good utility player, can fill a hole anywhere. Some of the other players have been great. I was really disappointed when Bailey Hayward was taken off, because I've enjoyed watching him. I think he's been very good for them and is starting at the back of the scrum in the last few games. Curtis Morin off the bench offers speed, and Blake Wilson was brilliant yesterday, filling in for Josh Addo-Carr. He had an outstanding game. So it's all working for the Dogs, and they do have a tough run. So, Matty, they've got the bye this weekend. So
and they'll need it.
The Dogs are the team that get the bye after 3 straight wins. Then they play the Roosters, the Sharks, and the Warriors. That's a big 3 weeks for the Dogs. And that will tell us more about where they're going to finish this season. But I was in P1 yesterday.
For 3 hours.
Well, yeah, it took me a long time to get out. And there's nothing like experiencing P1 after a Dogs win with 45,000 people there, and most of them Dogs. The horns were going off like constant, like it was deafening. But anyway, when you win, rub it in.
This is what we love on the Edgewater Homes text line, 0457 736 736 from 635. He simply says, "Doggies, Gold Coast Bulldog, thank you for that." Then from 923, different take, Bulldogs, bought, not bred. That from Dragon Boy, New Zealand. Well, there are some Bulldogs juniors coming through, and many of them. And 635 here. Actually, it's 625. Credit to Phil Gould. What a great job he's done. They won a Jersey Flegg Premiership last year or the year before, recently.
Yeah, they have. They got some very good juniors coming through.
Absolutely.
And that was part of the like when Gus got there. I think that was the first thing he did. That was the first thing he did, is focus on the pathways. He'd spent 7 or 8 years at Penrith, where he did the same thing and realised that is the key to success, long-term success. The Dogs have got some very talented juniors. So while they might be a club that has bought players in, it mightn't be that in the future. Morning, Brandy and Matt. Brandy, if I had the time, I'd call you on the open line and give you a serve. Both you and Voss need to call Graham Annesley and book the cabin next to Casey Badger. Well, what are we talking about? The penalty count? Some of the decisions made? Aaron, I'm not sure. Give us a call.
Give us a
on
call.
The Great Southern Bank open line.
1300
01 1170. There was a nasty incident yesterday. You mentioned the 10 minutes for Kurt Mann. That's the worst crusher I've seen in a number of years now. And that was the tackle, that exactly what Kurt Mann did by picking up a player and then putting all his weight on the back of the neck of that player is exactly the reason the rule was brought in. Now, we have crushers now that players fall into tackles and are accidentally, their head bends forward because of the weight and just the way the tackle spins around. We don't see intentional crushers anymore, but we saw one yesterday, and that's why Kurt Mann was sin-binned, and that's why he's facing 2 weeks on the sideline. Which is the disappointing part of yesterday's win by the Dogs.
I'll just go back to what on the text line, that message regarding Phil Gould's rebuild. They won the Jersey Flegg Grand Final last year. The New South Wales Cup team yesterday led 34-0 at halftime and won big, where there's players like Pawasa, far more silly. Gideon Katonga was doing really well. Hayes Perham at the fullback role, unsigned long-term, but he was dynamic yesterday, 3 or 4 try assists. So while they're going to lose some players maybe with these HIA stand-downs and injuries, there's some depth there already in quick time.
Yeah, Matty, they had a very good Harold Matts team this year too. Now, I know the Warriors went on to win the Harold Matthews, but they might have played the final against the Dogs. The Dogs had a good team, Harold Matts. So there's juniors coming through, Dragon Boy NZ at the moment, and that's exactly what Penrith did many years ago when Gus first came to the club. He bought a lot of players. He bought in half a dozen players that were fringe players at other clubs, but utility value players, and had to fill the side with that until those juniors could come through.
And one man he bought has been maybe the buy of the season, the leader of the club. Their origin star, Stephen Crichton, you've mentioned it off the top, Brandy. How good was he